Have you ever felt like you're searching for something that seems perpetually just out of reach? That despite all your spiritual seeking, prayer and study, there's still a piece missing from the puzzle of your inner transformation? If you've ever experienced that profound longing for answers that go deeper than surface-level spirituality, then what you're about to discover might surprise you. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Today, it's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Today, we're diving into something extraordinary, the hidden mental science that the early Christian church actually practiced, long before it became the institutionalized religion we know today. This isn't about feel-good platitudes or empty religious rhetoric. We're talking about a systematic approach to consciousness that was so powerful, it literally transformed the ancient world from a small gathering in Antioch into a movement that would reshape human history. Has this ever happened to you? You've read spiritual books, attended workshops, tried meditation techniques, positive thinking methods, even spent years in prayer and contemplation, yet somehow you still feel like you're missing the key that unlocks real, tangible transformation in your life. You're not alone. Millions of sincere seekers have walked this same path, searching for that elusive breakthrough that connects the spiritual realm with practical manifestation. What I'm about to share with you comes from a text that was never meant for casual readers. It speaks directly to what the author calls the essential you, not the surface-level personality that consumes spiritual content for entertainment, but the deeper part of your being that has been genuinely seeking truth, sometimes for decades. This is for those who have given their heart to the search, withdrawn it in disappointment, felt the presence of the divine, and then experienced that crushing sense of spiritual loneliness that follows. The early Christians in Antioch, the very place where followers of Jesus were first called Christians, discovered something that most modern spiritual seekers have completely missed. They understood that true spirituality isn't about comforting beliefs or sentimental promises. Instead, they developed what can only be described as a spiritual science, a systematic understanding of consciousness laws, soul principles, and kingdom dynamics that produced measurable, repeatable results in their daily lives. Stay with me until the end, because we're about to explore how these ancient practitioners combined mystical understanding with practical mental techniques to create what they called manifestation through consciousness. This wasn't theory-based philosophy, but experience-tested methodology that emerged from real communities of people who had learned to live as what they termed administrators of the divine. Deposit. What makes this approach so fascinating is that it bridges the gap between pure spirituality and practical psychology, between ancient wisdom and modern understanding of how the mind actually works. These weren't just religious believers hoping for divine intervention. They were spiritual scientists who had cracked the code of how thought, word, and visualization work together to reshape reality itself. The question that will guide our entire exploration today is this: what if the most powerful spiritual technology ever developed wasn't lost to history, but simply forgotten by modern seekers who were looking in all the wrong places? If you're genuinely committed to mastering these consciousness technologies and want to continue receiving this level of deep, practical spiritual content, subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss any of the advanced techniques we'll be exploring together. What most people don't understand about Antioch is that it wasn't simply another ancient city where early Christians happened to gather. This place operated on an entirely different frequency, what we might call today a vibrational field where two revolutionary currents converged to literally reshape human consciousness. On one side, you had the profound inner mysticism that Christ had awakened in his followers, that deep recognition of divine presence within. On the other side, there was something equally powerful but more practical, the concrete understanding, that words themselves carry creative force. This convergence created something unprecedented in human history. What emerged wasn't just another religious movement or spiritual community. What was born in Antioch was actually a manifestation technique disguised as a church. These early practitioners had discovered how to bridge the gap between spiritual insight and tangible results, between mystical experience and practical transformation. Think about the profound shift in mindset this represents. Most spiritual seekers throughout history have treated their inner journey and their outer circumstances as separate domains. You meditate, you pray, you study sacred texts, but somehow your daily reality, your relationships, your financial situation, your health, your sense of purpose remains frustratingly unchanged. The Antioch community cracked this code by understanding that the same consciousness that connects you to the divine is the consciousness that shapes your external world. This wasn't theoretical philosophy they were practicing. These were real people dealing with real challenges: persecution, economic uncertainty, social upheaval, who had learned to administer their lives from an entirely different operating system. Instead of reacting to circumstances as victims, they had discovered how to function as what they called children of God, meaning people who understood their true authority in shaping reality. The transformation process they developed was remarkably systematic. It wasn't about hoping for divine intervention or waiting for external circumstances to change. Instead, they learned to think with unprecedented clarity, cutting through the mental fog that keeps most people trapped in reactive patterns. They discovered how to speak with genuine authority, not the kind of authority that comes from position or force, but the authority that emerges when your words align with deeper truth. Perhaps most significantly, they mastered what we might recognize today as precision prayer and powerful visualization. This wasn't wishful thinking or positive psychology. They had tapped into something far more fundamental: the understanding that consciousness itself is the creative force behind all manifestation. When you truly grasp this principle and learn to work with it deliberately, your entire relationship with reality shifts. The hidden truth behind their success was the recognition that most people live their entire lives without ever accessing their real power. We've been conditioned to see ourselves as separate from the creative force of the universe, as small beings hoping for good fortune rather than conscious participants in the unfolding of our own destiny. The Antioch revelation shattered this illusion completely. This journey from victim consciousness to divine administration represents one of the most profound transformations a human being can experience. It's not about developing supernatural abilities or becoming someone you're not. It's about remembering and reclaiming who you actually are, beneath all the conditioning, all the limitations, all the stories you've been told about what's possible for your life. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding the mechanics of how this transformation actually works is where the real breakthrough happens. The early Christians didn't just stumble upon these insights accidentally. They developed specific practices, precise methodologies that anyone can learn and apply. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this transformation," if this resonates with the journey you're on right now. The most profound revelation hidden within this ancient wisdom isn't actually about learning something new. It's about remembering something you've always known, but somehow forgotten. The early practitioners understood that their role wasn't to convince anyone of spiritual truths, but rather to awaken people to their authentic identity. This represents a fundamental shift in how we approach personal transformation and spiritual growth. You see, most of us have been conditioned to believe we need to become something different, to acquire new qualities, or to somehow earn our way into a better version of ourselves. But the Antioch discovery reveals something far more revolutionary: that who you truly are is already the great open door to everything you've been seeking. This isn't metaphorical poetry. It's a precise, understanding of consciousness that changes everything about how you navigate life. The invitation isn't to struggle toward some distant goal or to perfect yourself through endless effort. The invitation is simply to enter, to step through that door of recognition and begin operating from your true nature. Everything you've been searching for, the peace, the clarity, the sense of purpose, the abundance, the meaningful connections, all of it is already fulfilled within what they called the mental science of the primitive church. If something within you recognized the authenticity of these ancient practices, if you felt that spark of truth that these early Christians discovered, expressing that recognition with a like helps this transformative content reach other serious seekers who are ready for genuine spiritual technology. This mental science wasn't theoretical knowledge stored in ancient texts. It was a living laboratory of consciousness transformation that operated in real time, with real people, producing real results. Antioch became the epicenter of what can only be described as the greatest silent revolution of the human soul in recorded history. Silent, because it happened primarily in the inner landscape of consciousness, yet so powerful that its impact literally reshaped civilization. What made Antioch so extraordinary was its unique character as both a splendid and turbulent city. This wasn't some peaceful monastery removed from the chaos of ordinary life. It was a bustling crossroads of cultures, commerce, and conflicting worldviews, much like the environment we navigate today. Yet within this dynamic complexity, something unprecedented was unfolding. People were discovering how to access a different operating system for human consciousness. The key insight that emerged from this spiritual laboratory was the understanding that the spirit of divine intelligence always moves forward wherever it encounters a human heart genuinely willing to hear truth. Not religious truth, not philosophical theory, but living truth that has immediate practical application. This willingness creates an opening, a receptivity that allows profound transformation to occur naturally. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be simply another religious movement, a sophisticated understanding of consciousness was being developed and tested. These practitioners had discovered that human awareness operates according to specific laws, and when you understand these laws and work with them deliberately, you can create predictable shifts in your experience of reality. The journey they mapped out wasn't about adding something to yourself, but about removing the obstacles that prevent you from recognizing what's already present. It's like cleaning a window. You're not creating the light, you're simply removing what blocks it from shining through clearly. This process of recognition and removal represents one of the most elegant approaches to personal transformation ever developed. What makes this approach so powerful is its foundation in practical mysticism rather than abstract spirituality. These weren't people escaping from the world into spiritual fantasies. They were individuals learning to engage with life's challenges from a completely different mindset, one that recognized their inherent connection to creative intelligence and their natural authority as conscious beings. Now, I want to explore exactly how this recognition process works, because understanding the specific mechanisms they discovered is where the real breakthrough becomes accessible to us today. Write in the comments, "I remember now," if this is awakening something familiar within you. The breakthrough that occurred in Antioch represents one of the most significant shifts in human consciousness development, yet most people completely miss its revolutionary implications. When followers of Jesus were first called Christians in this vibrant city, something far more profound was happening than simply the emergence of a new religious label. What was actually being born was the world's first documented mental method that successfully bridged the gap between mystical understanding and practical application. This wasn't just another spiritual movement where people gathered to worship or study sacred texts. The Antioch community had discovered how to transform inner mystical experiences into concrete tools for reshaping reality. They developed what we might recognized today as a systematic approach to consciousness that treated spiritual principles as operating instructions rather than abstract beliefs. The hidden truth behind this transformation lies in understanding that they weren't creating a religion in the traditional sense. Instead, they were pioneering a mental technology that combined the profound mystical teachings about the inner kingdom with the practical recognition that words themselves function as creative instruments. This synthesis had never been achieved before with such precision and effectiveness. What makes their approach so remarkable is that it was fundamentally experimental. The disciples in Antioch didn't limit themselves to simply remembering and repeating what their teacher had said. They began conducting their own consciousness experiments, testing their own words, developing their own decrees, and strengthening their own faith through direct experience. This represents the awakening of authentic spiritual practice. The recognition that truth isn't something you inherit from others, but something you discover through your own conscious engagement with universal principles. This experimental mindset completely revolutionizes how we approach personal transformation and spiritual growth. Instead of being passive recipients of inherited wisdom, they became active researchers in the laboratory of consciousness. They discovered that when you understand the mechanics behind mystical experiences, you can learn to work with those same mechanics deliberately to create specific outcomes in your life. The impact of this shift cannot be overstated. They had moved beyond the limitations of traditional religious practice, where people hope for divine intervention or wait for external circumstances to change. Instead, they learned to function as conscious participants in the creative process, understanding that their thoughts, words, and focused attention were actually tools for influencing the fabric of reality itself. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be spiritual gatherings, they were developing and refining techniques that would seem remarkably familiar to anyone studying modern consciousness research or quantum physics. They understood that consciousness and physical reality are intimately connected, and they learned to work with this connection systematically. For those ready to go beyond surface-level spirituality and dive into the real mechanics of consciousness transformation, subscribing gives you access to the complete system these ancient practitioners developed for modern application. This journey from passive belief to active experimentation represents one of the most empowering decisions any individual can make. It's the difference between hoping that life will improve and learning to consciously participate in creating the improvements you desire. The Antioch practitioners had discovered that every person possesses this creative capacity, but most never learn to access it deliberately. Their approach was grounded in the understanding that spiritual principles operate according to specific laws, just like physical laws. And when you understand these laws and work with them consistently, you can achieve predictable results. This wasn't wishful thinking or positive psychology. It was practical mysticism applied to everyday challenges and opportunities. Now, I want to examine the specific techniques they developed for this conscious experimentation, because understanding their methodology is what makes this ancient wisdom immediately applicable to modern life. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to experiment," if you're feeling called to move beyond passive spiritual consumption into active practice. What most people miss when they read ancient spiritual texts is that many phrases we interpret as poetic metaphors were actually precise descriptions of mental laws. When Acts chapter 11 mentions the hand of the Lord being with the early Christians, this wasn't flowery religious language. It was documenting the operation of a specific consciousness principle that these practitioners had learned to activate deliberately. The hidden truth behind this phrase reveals something revolutionary about how spiritual force actually functions. The divine principle doesn't respond randomly or based on worthiness or external circumstances. Instead, it responds with power wherever there's a specific combination of mental conditions. affirmative thinking, clear vision, and persistent confidence. This isn't theology. This is practical psychology applied to consciousness transformation. Think about the profound implications of understanding this as law rather than mystery. When you recognize that spiritual force operates according to predictable principles, your entire approach to creating change in your life shifts dramatically. Instead of hoping for divine intervention or waiting for circumstances to align favorably, you can learn to create the mental conditions that naturally activate this force. The Antioch community had made a breakthrough discovery that would revolutionize human potential if more people understood it today. They realized that every word pronounced with genuine faith functions as a seed in the field of consciousness, and like any seed, it produces fruit according to its nature. This wasn't superstition or wishful thinking. They had identified a fundamental law governing how thoughts and words interact with the creative matrix of reality. Perhaps their most powerful innovation was transforming the I am declaration from a theological concept into a practical creative tool. When Moses encountered the burning bush and asked for God's name, the response, "I am that I am," revealed something far more practical than most people realize. The early Christians understood this as the ultimate affirmation of spiritual identity and creative authority. The mindset shift this represents is absolutely crucial for anyone serious about personal transformation. Instead of seeing themselves as separate from divine power, hoping to receive blessings from an external source, they learned to recognize their own consciousness as the very location where divine creativity expresses itself. The I am formula became their way of consciously aligning with this creative force. Behind the scenes of their spiritual practices, they were essentially programming their subconscious minds with new, operating instructions. Every time they used the I am formula, followed by an affirmative statement, they were overwriting limiting beliefs and installing empowering truths about their authentic nature and capabilities. This process creates profound shifts in both internal experience and external circumstances. The journey from unconscious reactive thinking to conscious creative thinking represents one of the most significant decisions any person can make. Most people spend their entire lives using their mental faculties randomly, never realizing they possess the ability to direct their consciousness with precision toward specific outcomes. The Antioch practitioners had discovered this capacity and developed systematic ways to strengthen and refine it. What makes their approach so effective is that it works with the natural laws of consciousness rather than against them. They understood that the same mental principles that can create limitation and struggle can be consciously redirected to create expansion and success. It's simply a matter of learning to work with these laws deliberately rather than accidentally. The impact of mastering this understanding extends far beyond personal benefit. When you learn to think, speak, and visualize from this elevated awareness, you naturally become a source of positive influence for everyone around you. Your transformed consciousness becomes a field of possibility that others can sense and be inspired by. Now, I want to explore the specific mechanics of how they developed and refined this I am practice, because understanding the technical details is what makes this ancient wisdom immediately practical for modern application. Write in the comments, "I am ready," if you're beginning to see the connection between your words and your reality. One of the most fascinating revelations about the early Christian consciousness technology comes from studying the Didache, one of the oldest surviving Christian documents that most people have never heard of. When you examine this ancient text with what they called spiritual eyes, meaning you look beyond the surface religious language to understand the underlying methodology, you discover something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. What appears to be simple community practices and basic spiritual guidelines is actually a sophisticated manual for consciousness programming. Every element described in the Didache, the focused intentions, the spoken declarations, the repetitive rhythms. Wasn't liturgy in the traditional sense. These were precision tools designed to create specific transformations in human awareness and perception. When content genuinely impacts your understanding and opens new possibilities for your consciousness journey, a simple like becomes your way of acknowledging that connection and helping these profound teachings find their way to others who need them most. The hidden truth behind these practices reveals how the early Christians had developed what we would recognize today as advanced techniques for subconscious reprogramming. They understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover, that repetitive, intentional practices can literally rewire neural pathways and create new default patterns of thinking and responding. Every pronounced blessing they incorporated into their daily routine served a specific function in what they called the formation of new grooves in consciousness. Think about that. Embrace for a moment new grooves in consciousness. They had identified that human awareness operates through habitual patterns, like water flowing through established channels, and they learned how to consciously create new channels that would naturally guide thoughts and emotions in more beneficial directions. This process of subconscious re-education through intentional spiritual practice represents one of the most sophisticated approaches to personal transformation ever developed. When they repeated the Lord's Prayer or engaged in ritual thanksgiving, they weren't simply going through religious motions. They were engaging in deliberate consciousness engineering, using the power of repetition and focused attention to install new operating systems in their minds. The journey from unconscious mental habits to conscious mental cultivation requires understanding how the subconscious mind actually functions. The early practitioners had discovered that the subconscious doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's vividly imagined, and it responds to repetition by creating neural pathways that make certain thoughts and behaviors increasingly automatic. Behind the scenes of their spiritual gatherings, they were essentially conducting group sessions in consciousness transformation. Each blessing spoken aloud, each prayer repeated in unison, each declaration made collectively was strengthening new mental patterns while weakening old ones. The impact of this systematic approach was profound. Entire communities were shifting their collective mindset from limitation to possibility. What makes their methodology so brilliant is that it worked with the natural learning mechanisms of the human brain rather than against them. They understood that lasting transformation happens not through willpower or forced positive thinking, but through the gradual installation of new automatic responses through consistent, intentional practice. The decisions they made about which words to repeat, which blessings to pronounce, and which prayers to practice weren't random or purely devotional. Everything was strategically designed to create specific shifts in consciousness. They had identified the most effective phrases, rhythms, and intentions for programming the subconscious mind with empowering beliefs and elevated awareness. This approach to spiritual practice completely revolutionizes how we understand the relationship between repetition and transformation. Instead of viewing repeated prayers or affirmations as meaningless ritual, we can recognize them as sophisticated tools for consciousness evolution when applied with proper understanding and intention. Now, I want to examine the specific mechanics of how they structured these programming sessions, because understanding their systematic approach is what makes this ancient technology immediately applicable to creating breakthrough transformations in modern life. Write in the comments, programming activated, if you're beginning to see how intentional repetition could reshape your mental patterns. One of the most profound insights into this ancient consciousness technology comes from studying the teachings of Ignatius of Antioch, whose approach to spiritual practice was far more sophisticated than most people realize. When Ignatius spoke repeatedly about interior unity with Christ, He wasn't describing sentimental devotion or emotional religious experience. Instead, he was outlining a precise methodology for achieving what he called the real fusion of thought, word, and action. This fusion represents something revolutionary in human development, the alignment of all aspects of consciousness toward a single focused intention. Most people live with fragmented awareness, where their thoughts pull in one direction, their words express something different, and their actions contradict both. Ignatius had discovered how to create complete internal coherence, where every level of consciousness operates in harmony toward the same outcome. The hidden truth behind his teachings reveals that what he was actually describing were metaphysical affirmations designed to help people accept what he called the principle of provision in the mind. This wasn't theological speculation, but practical psychology applied to consciousness transformation. He understood that when you truly accept abundance as a principle operating within your own awareness, your entire relationship with scarcity and limitation shifts fundamentally. Behind the scenes of his spiritual guidance, Ignatius was essentially teaching people how to reprogram their relationship with divine creative force. Instead of seeing it as something external that might or might not respond to their prayers, he helped them recognize it as an internal principle that responds consistently to properly aligned consciousness. This shift in mindset creates profound changes in both inner experience and outer circumstances. What makes his approach so powerful is that it was grounded in the understanding that the true foundation of any authentic spiritual community isn't external organization or religious structure. It's what he called Christ internal. This internal Christ isn't a religious concept, but a practical description of the highest creative potential within human consciousness, the aspect of awareness that can consciously participate in shaping reality. The journey toward accessing this internal foundation requires recognizing that there simply cannot be genuine spiritual community without what we would call today positive thinking focused on good. This isn't naive optimism or denial of challenges. It's the disciplined cultivation of mental attitudes that naturally align with creative solutions rather than problematic patterns. This understanding completely revolutionizes how we approach both personal transformation and collective change. Instead of hoping for external circumstances to improve or waiting for others to create the changes we want to see, we learn to function from this internal foundation that naturally generates beneficial outcomes through its very presence and activity. The impact of this shift extends far beyond individual benefit. Ignatius understood that when people operate from this internal Christ consciousness, miracles become natural expressions rather than rare exceptions. However, these miracles don't happen through passive hoping or vague spiritual wishes. They emerge through what the early practitioners called firm declaration, conscious, definitive statements that align thought, emotion, and intention towards specific outcomes. What's remarkable is that they had already developed what we might recognize today as scientific prayer and affirmative decree. These weren't random spiritual practices, but systematic approaches to consciousness that treated prayer as applied science rather than desperate pleading. They understood the specific conditions that activate creative force and learned to create those conditions deliberately. The decisions they made about how to structure their spiritual practices, what declarations to make, and how to maintain their internal alignment weren't based on tradition or blind faith. Everything was designed according to their understanding of how consciousness actually functions as a creative instrument when properly directed and sustained. The most empowering revelation about the Antioch consciousness technology is that it isn't locked away in ancient history or limited to a specific geographic location. The hidden truth is that absolutely nothing prevents you from recreating this transformative mental state in your own heart and mind right now. except for two very specific obstacles that most people never identify clearly enough to overcome. The first obstacle is indecision, that state of mental wavering where you never quite commit fully to operating from your highest creative potential. The second is what they called the habit of thinking externally, which means constantly looking outside yourself for solutions, validation, and creative power that actually resides within your own consciousness. These two patterns keep most people trapped in reactive rather than creative modes of living. The breakthrough that the early practitioners achieved was making a definitive decision to affirm what they called their divine filiation, their recognition that they were connected to and could consciously access the same creative intelligence that shapes the universe itself. This wasn't religious belief, but practical psychology applied to consciousness expansion. When you make this decision and begin each day by consciously pronouncing truth, rather than randomly thinking whatever thoughts happen to arise, something extraordinary begins to shift in your mental landscape. What emerges is what they described as Antioch, returning to you as a superior mental state. This isn't about recreating ancient religious practices, but about accessing the same elevated level of consciousness that made their remarkable transformations possible. It's a state where you think, speak, and act from your highest creative potential rather than from limitation, fear, or reactive patterns. The journey toward establishing this superior mental state begins with recognizing the profound impact of the words you choose to create each day. Most people never pause to consider this fundamental question. What word are you actually creating when you begin each day? Are you unconsciously generating thoughts of lack, worry, or struggle, or are you deliberately choosing to create thoughts that align with your highest possibilities? This extends beyond morning thoughts to the decrees you plant in your consciousness before sleeping. The subconscious mind is most receptive during those transition moments between waking and sleeping, making them prime opportunities for programming new patterns of thought and expectation. The early Christians understood this and developed specific practices for ending each day with conscious intention rather than random mental activity. Perhaps most significantly, they learned to monitor and direct the images they maintained during prayer or meditation. Instead of allowing their minds to wander aimlessly or focus on problems and limitations, they cultivated the discipline of holding specific visions that aligned with their desired outcomes and highest understanding of possibility. Behind the scenes of their spiritual practice was the recognition that Antioch isn't fundamentally a place, but a mental lesson about how consciousness functions when properly directed. This lesson can be chosen and applied immediately through conscious affirmation and deliberate thought direction. You don't need to wait for better circumstances or more spiritual development. You can begin accessing this elevated state of awareness right now. The impact of making this choice extends far beyond personal benefit. When you operate from this Antioch consciousness, you naturally become a source of elevated thinking and creative solutions for everyone around you. Your transformed mental state creates a field of possibility that others can sense and be inspired by, just as happened in the original Antioch community. The key insight is that transformation happens through decision rather than gradual improvement. The moment you choose to consciously direct your daily word creation, your evening decrees, and your prayer imagery, you begin operating from the same consciousness principles that made the ancient practitioners so remarkably effective. Now, I want to examine the specific structure they developed for this daily consciousness practice, because understanding their systematic approach is what makes this ancient wisdom immediately practical for creating breakthrough results in modern life. Write in the comments, Antioch Awakening, if you're ready to make this decision and begin consciously creating your daily mental reality. The transformation from ordinary consciousness to Antioch awareness requires what the early practitioners developed as a specific consecration prayer, not a religious ritual, but a precise method for reprogramming your fundamental relationship with thoughts, words, and actions. This prayer serves as a bridge between random mental activity and conscious creation, transforming every thought into deliberate creation, every word into a planted seed, and every action into a revelation of your highest creative potential. The hidden truth behind this consecration process is that it shifts you from living by habit to living by inspiration. Most people operate on autopilot, unconsciously repeating the same mental patterns, speaking the same limiting words, and taking the same reactive actions day after day. The consecration breaks this unconscious cycle by establishing a new operating system where every aspect of your being becomes an instrument of conscious creativity. What makes this approach so revolutionary is that it transforms prayer from hopeful pleading into applied science. Instead of asking external forces to change your circumstances, you learn to use prayer as a technology for aligning your consciousness with the creative principles that shape reality. This shift from supplication to application represents one of the most empowering decisions any person can make in their spiritual development. The journey toward mastering this consecration leads to understanding what they called the key of the name, the recognition that everything existing in the universe has a name that isn't arbitrary, but represents a specific vibration that defines, models, and maintains its essential nature. This isn't mystical philosophy, but practical understanding of how consciousness and reality interact at the most fundamental level. Behind the scenes of physical existence lies a profound truth that the early Christians had discovered. All creation is essentially language, and within that cosmic language system, there exists one word that contains everything else. That word is I am. When you truly understand the creative power contained within this simple declaration, your entire relationship with your own potential transforms dramatically. The impact of recognizing this principle extends far beyond personal empowerment. When you grasp that your consciousness is literally participating in the same creative force that shapes galaxies and generates life itself, every word you speak becomes an act of conscious creation rather than unconscious reaction. You begin to understand that you're not separate from creative intelligence, but an active expression of it. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach challenges, opportunities, and daily interactions. Instead of seeing yourself as powerless in the face of circumstances, you recognize that your very awareness is the location where creative solutions emerge. The I Am declaration becomes your tool for consciously aligning with the specific aspects of infinite potential that you want to experience and express. The mindset shift this creates is profound. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start declaring, "I am the solution to this situation." You stop hoping for better circumstances and start using your consciousness to generate them. You stop feeling victimized by external conditions and start functioning as a conscious participant in shaping them. What the early practitioners discovered is that when you consistently use the I am formula, followed by affirmative statements about your true nature and desired experiences, you're essentially programming your subconscious mind with new operating instructions. These instructions then influence your perceptions, decisions, and actions in ways that naturally create alignment between your inner vision and outer reality. The technique they developed was remarkably simple, yet incredibly powerful. By beginning each I am statement with absolute conviction and following it with clear, positive declarations about their identity and capabilities, they learned to override limiting beliefs and install empowering truths about their authentic nature and creative authority. Now, I want to explore exactly how they structured these I am declarations to achieve maximum transformative impact, because understanding their precise methodology is what makes this ancient technology immediately applicable to creating breakthrough results in every area of modern life. Write in the comments, "I am awakening," if you're beginning to sense the creative power contained within your own consciousness. The most profound revelation in human consciousness development occurred during what most people consider a simple biblical story: Moses' encounter with the burning bush. When Moses asked for the name of the divine presence sending him on his mission, the response, "I am that I am," wasn't a mysterious evasion or cryptic riddle. It was the most powerful consciousness technology ever revealed to humanity, containing the complete blueprint for understanding how creative force actually operates. This revelation represents pure principle of being, not a personality, not an emotion, not even a form, but the fundamental creative essence that exists before all manifestation. When you truly grasp what was being communicated in that moment, your entire understanding of your own creative potential shifts dramatically. The divine wasn't identifying itself as separate from creation, but as the very principle of existence that animates all life and consciousness. The hidden truth behind this revelation becomes even more extraordinary when we examine how Jesus applied this same principle centuries later, when he declared before the Pharisees, "Before Abraham was, I am." He wasn't making a theological statement about his personal history. He was demonstrating his mastery of consciousness by placing himself deliberately in what they called the plane of eternity, that timeless realm where there's no past or future, no limitation or lack, only pure creative presence. This represents one of the most significant breakthroughs in understanding human potential. Jesus was showing that any individual can access this same eternal plane of consciousness by properly using the I am declaration. When you pronounce I am with genuine faith and understanding, you're not speaking about your temporary personality or circumstances. You're connecting with the same creative principle that shapes galaxies and generates life itself. The journey toward mastering this consciousness technology requires understanding that the I am statement isn't about ego or personal identity in the ordinary sense. It's about recognizing and aligning with the creative force that operates through your awareness. This shift in mindset creates profound transformations in both inner experience and outer circumstances, because you're no longer operating from limitation, but from infinite creative potential. Behind the scenes of this ancient wisdom lies a practical understanding that most modern spiritual seekers completely miss. The early practitioners didn't use these declarations as positive thinking exercises or self-help affirmations. They understood them as precision tools for consciousness programming that could literally reorganize reality by changing the fundamental vibration from which they operated. The impact of mastering this practice extends far beyond personal empowerment. When you consistently speak from this eternal I am consciousness, you naturally begin influencing your environment, relationships, and circumstances in ways that seem almost miraculous to those still operating from ordinary awareness. This happens not through force or manipulation, but through the natural attractive power of elevated consciousness. What makes this approach so effective is that it works with the fundamental laws governing how consciousness and reality interact. Instead of trying to change external conditions through effort and struggle, you learn to change the internal conditions that automatically generate different external experiences. This represents the difference between working against universal principles and working with them. The decisions you make about how to use the I am formula determine whether you remain trapped in limited thinking or begin accessing your authentic creative authority. Most people unconsciously use this power in negative ways, declaring, "I am tired, I am broke, I am confused," Without realizing they're actually programming their subconscious mind to create those exact experiences. However, when you begin using this same principle consciously and constructively, declaring, "I am peace, I am abundance, I am clarity," you start activating entirely different patterns in your consciousness that naturally attract and create experiences that match these elevated states. Now, I want to explore the specific methodology the early Christians developed for maximizing the transformative power of these I am declarations, because understanding their systematic approach is what transforms this ancient wisdom into immediately practical tools for modern consciousness evolution. Write in the comments, "I am eternal," if you're beginning to sense this timeless creative presence within your own awareness. The Syrian Christians had unlocked what they considered the most sacred secret in consciousness development, the understanding that the I am declaration wasn't merely a religious phrase, but a precise technology for reality transformation. In their liturgies and spiritual practices, they employed what they called the reverent and creative use of the name, not just for worship or devotion, but as an active tool for reshaping their experience of life itself. The hidden truth they discovered is expressed in what they considered an inviolable law. Everything that follows I am takes form. This isn't metaphysical theory or wishful thinking. It's a practical understanding of how consciousness functions as a creative instrument. When you declare "I am," followed by any statement, you're essentially giving instructions to the universe about what you want to experience and express. This represents a profound shift in mindset from passive spirituality to active consciousness engineering. Instead of hoping that external circumstances will improve or waiting for divine intervention to solve their challenges, they learn to function as conscious participants in creating their reality through deliberate use of this creative principle. Behind the scenes of their spiritual communities, they developed what we would recognize today as scientific affirmation methodology. This wasn't random positive thinking or casual self-help practices, but a systematic approach to consciousness programming that produced predictable, measurable results in people's lives. The journey toward mastering this technology begins with understanding the specific structure they discovered for maximum effectiveness. Their method was elegantly simple, yet remarkably powerful. Choose a simple, clear, positive affirmation that represents the state or experience you want to cultivate. Write it down to engage multiple senses and reinforce the programming. Then repeat, "I am," followed by your desired state for exactly 5 minutes in a calm environment with slow, deliberate breathing. What makes their approach so effective is the precise timing and conditions they established. They discovered that consciousness is most receptive to new programming during 2 specific windows each day, immediately upon waking and just before sleeping. During these transition periods, the conscious mind is naturally more relaxed, and the subconscious is more open to receiving new instructions. The impact of this practice extends far beyond the 5-minute sessions themselves. When you consistently program your consciousness with clear, positive I am statements during these optimal windows, you're essentially installing new default settings for how you think, feel, and respond throughout the day. These new patterns then influence your decisions, relationships, and opportunities in ways that naturally align with your declared reality. The transformation process works because the subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between what's actually happening and what's vividly imagined with strong emotion and repetition. When you declare, "I am peace," or "I am abundance," with genuine feeling and consistent practice, your subconscious begins organizing your perceptions and behaviors to match these declarations. What the Syrian Christians understood is that this practice requires both reverence and precision. The reverence ensures you're approaching the technology with appropriate respect for its power, while the precision ensures you're applying it with maximum effectiveness. This combination of sacred awareness and scientific methodology is what made their results so consistently remarkable. The decisions you make about which I am statements to focus on determine the direction of your consciousness evolution. They learned to choose declarations that stretch their awareness beyond current limitations while remaining believable enough for their subconscious to accept. This balance between vision and believability is crucial for creating sustainable transformation rather than temporary mood improvements. Now, I want to explore the advanced techniques they developed for amplifying the power of these I am declarations, because understanding their sophisticated methodology is what transforms this ancient practice into a complete system for consciousness mastery and reality creation. Write in the comments, I am transforming, if you're ready to begin implementing this systematic approach to consciousness programming. One of the most crucial revelations in consciousness programming is understanding the devastating impact of unconscious negative self-declarations. When you casually say, I am poor, I am weak, or I am foolish, you're not just expressing temporary feelings or describing current circumstances. You're actually engaging in what the early practitioners considered a form of spiritual blasphemy, the misuse of divine creative power to program limitation and suffering into your own experience. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach everyday language and self-talk. The hidden truth is that every negative I am statement functions, adds a direct order to your subconscious mind, which then works tirelessly to create evidence and experiences that match your declarations. Your subconscious doesn't evaluate whether these commands are beneficial or harmful. It simply executes whatever instructions you provide through your consistent thoughts and words. The journey toward conscious language requires recognizing that you're literally giving programming instructions to the most powerful creative force in your personal universe. Every time you speak about yourself, when you understand this principle, you realize that casual negativity isn't harmless venting, but active self-sabotage at the deepest levels of consciousness. Behind the scenes of every limitation you experience in life, you'll likely find unconscious negative declarations you've been making for years. The person struggling financially has probably declared, I am broke, countless times. The individual dealing with health challenges has likely affirmed, I am sick repeatedly. These aren't observations, they're creative commands that your consciousness then works to fulfill. The transformation begins when you make the conscious decision to replace these destructive patterns with empowering declarations. Instead of I am poor, you learn to declare I am divine wisdom or I am perfect provision. Instead of I am weak, you affirm I am infinite strength. Instead of I am foolish, you proclaim I am God's intelligence expressing perfectly. These aren't lies or denials of current reality. They're conscious redirections of your creative power toward beneficial outcomes. What makes this practice so powerful is understanding that the effect isn't immediate, but inevitable when practiced consistently. The early Christians discovered that after making these positive I am declarations, the most important step was maintaining what they called conscious silence, moments of interior stillness, where you simply allow the programming to settle into your consciousness without interference. The impact of this silence phase cannot be overstated. This is where most people sabotage their own transformation by immediately looking for external signs or evidence that their declarations are working. The Syrian practitioners understood that expecting external validation interrupts the programming process before it can take root in consciousness. Instead of seeking external signs, they learned to cultivate what they called internal certainty, a quiet knowing that the cause has been properly sown and will produce its corresponding effect in perfect timing. This internal certainty becomes stronger with practice and serves as your confirmation that the consciousness programming is working even before physical evidence appears. The mindset shift this creates is profound. You stop measuring the effectiveness of your practice by immediate external changes and start recognizing the subtle but definite shifts in your inner landscape. Increased peace, clearer thinking, more confident decision-making, and enhanced intuitive guidance. These internal changes are actually the real evidence that your consciousness is being successfully reprogrammed. This understanding requires patience and faith in the process, but not blind faith. It's faith based on understanding how consciousness functions as a creative instrument. When you plant a seed in soil, you don't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. You trust the natural laws that govern growth and wait for the inevitable manifestation. Consciousness programming works according to similar principles. Now, I want to explore the advanced integration techniques they developed for maintaining this elevated consciousness throughout daily activities, because understanding how to sustain these transformations in real-world situations is what makes this ancient technology truly practical for modern life. Write in the comments, internal certainty growing if you're beginning, to sense this quiet knowing that your consciousness programming is taking root. The transformation from unconscious language patterns to conscious declaration mastery requires what the early practitioners called daily vigilance over every statement you make about yourself and your reality. This isn't about becoming obsessively self-conscious or paranoid about every word, but rather developing the awareness to recognize that every declaration functions as a creative command in the ongoing programming of your consciousness. The journey toward this mastery begins with understanding that there truly is no greater prayer and no greater power than the conscious use of the I Am formula throughout your daily life. Most people treat prayer as something they do at specific times in specific places, but the Syrian Christians had discovered that every moment offers an opportunity to consciously direct your creative force through deliberate declaration. This represents a profound shift in mindset from casual communication to conscious creation. When you begin guarding each statement and choosing consciously what you declare, you're essentially taking responsibility for the continuous programming of your own consciousness. Instead of allowing random thoughts and reactive emotions to shape your internal landscape, you become the deliberate architect of your own mental environment. Behind the scenes of this practice lies the recognition that most people spend their entire lives unconsciously programming themselves with limitation, struggle, and scarcity through careless language. They declare, "I am stressed, I am overwhelmed, I am struggling," without realizing these statements are actually creative commands that their consciousness then works to fulfill through corresponding experiences and circumstances. The hidden truth about consciousness programming is that it's happening constantly, whether you're aware of it or not. The question isn't whether you're programming your mind. The question is whether you're doing it consciously and constructively or unconsciously and destructively. Making the I Am formula your daily tool ensures that this inevitable programming serves your highest good rather than your limitations. What makes this practice so revolutionary is that it connects you with what Paul described in Colossians as one of the greatest mysteries of human potential. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Most people completely misunderstand this profound revelation, thinking it refers to some future heavenly reward or external religious doctrine. But Paul was pointing to something far more immediate and practical: Christ as interior reality rather than distant object of devotion. This Christ consciousness represents what the early practitioners called the messianic spark within every human being, that aspect of your awareness that's connected to infinite creative intelligence and unlimited potential. When you recognize this inner Christ not as religious concept, but as practical reality, your entire relationship with your own capabilities transforms dramatically. The impact of this recognition extends far beyond personal empowerment. When you understand that you carry within your own consciousness what they called an infinite bank of wisdom, creativity, and provision, you stop looking outside yourself for solutions and start accessing the unlimited resources that are always available within your own awareness. This shift from external seeking to internal recognition represents one of the most profound transformations possible in human consciousness development. Instead of feeling dependent on circumstances, other people, or external conditions for your well-being and success, you learn to function from this interior source that's completely independent of external fluctuations. The journey toward accessing this infinite bank requires understanding that it's not about developing new capabilities, but about removing the mental obstacles that prevent you from recognizing capabilities you already possess. The Christ within isn't something you need to acquire. It's something you need to acknowledge and allow to express itself through your thoughts, words, and actions. The decisions you make about whether to operate from this interior Christ consciousness or from external dependency determine whether you experience life as limitation or abundance, struggle or flow, scarcity or sufficiency. This isn't theological speculation, but practical psychology applied to consciousness transformation. Now, I want to explore the specific techniques they developed for accessing and operating from this infinite interior bank, because understanding their methodology is what transforms this ancient wisdom into immediately practical tools for creating breakthrough results in modern life. Write in the comments, "Interior Bank Unlocked," if you're beginning to sense this unlimited creative potential within your own consciousness. The revelation that human beings are partakers of divine nature represents one of the most revolutionary concepts in consciousness development, yet most people either dismiss it as religious hyperbole or fail to grasp its stunning practical implications. When Peter wrote about this in his second letter, he wasn't describing some distant spiritual goal, but a present reality available to anyone willing to recognize and develop their authentic creative capacity. This participation in divine nature means possessing within your own consciousness the capacity to think like infinite intelligence, feel like unconditional love, and create like the force that shapes galaxies and generates life itself. The hidden truth is that you're not separate from this creative intelligence. You're actually a unique expression of it, with full access to what they called infinite good operating through your awareness. The journey toward recognizing this divine participation requires understanding a crucial distinction that prevents most people from accessing their authentic power. You're not God in the absolute sense, but you are God's expression in individualized form. This means you have access to the same creative principles and unlimited potential, but you experience them through your unique perspective and personality. Behind the scenes of ordinary consciousness lies this extraordinary capacity that most people never learn to access deliberately. When you truly grasp that divine nature isn't something you need to acquire, but something you need to recognize and allow to function through you, your entire relationship with challenges, opportunities, and possibilities shifts dramatically. This recognition leads to what the early practitioners developed as one of their most powerful consciousness tools, the golden key. This isn't a magic formula or mystical incantation, but a precise technique for consciousness direction that can transform any situation by changing the fundamental vibration from which you're operating. The golden key works by shifting your attention completely away from the problem and focusing it wholeheartedly on the infinite intelligence within you, applied to provision and abundance. This means stopping all thinking about lack, limitation, and scarcity, and beginning to think exclusively about the infinite good that already exists within your consciousness, waiting to be recognized and expressed. What makes this technique so effective is that it works with the fundamental law governing how consciousness creates experience. Whatever you focus on with sustained attention and emotional involvement expands in your reality. When you consistently focus on problems, limitations, and lack, you unconsciously strengthen these patterns. But when you deliberately redirect your attention to the infinite good within, you activate entirely different creative possibilities. The transformation this creates is profound. Instead of trying to solve problems through analysis, worry, and effortful thinking, you learn to dissolve them by connecting with the intelligence that naturally knows all solutions. Instead of struggling against circumstances, you align with the creative force that can reorganize any situation from within. The impact of mastering this attention direction extends far beyond problem solving. When you consistently operate from recognition of infinite good rather than fear of limitation, you do naturally begin attracting opportunities, resources, and circumstances that match this elevated consciousness. This happens not through force or manipulation, but through the natural attractive power of aligned awareness. The mindset shift this represents is revolutionary. You stop asking, "How can I fix this problem?" and start declaring, "The infinite intelligence within me knows the perfect solution." You stop struggling to make things happen and start allowing solutions to emerge from the unlimited creativity that's always available within your own consciousness. The decisions you make about where to place your attention determine whether you operate from the limited perspective of problem consciousness or the unlimited perspective of solution consciousness. This choice is available every moment and determines the quality of your entire life experience. Now, I want to explore the advanced applications of this golden key technique, because understanding how to apply it systematically to every area of life is what transforms this simple practice into a complete technology for consciousness mastery and reality transformation. Write in the comments, "Golden Key activated," if you're ready to begin redirecting your attention from problems to infinite solutions. The most profound shift in consciousness programming occurs when you begin using recognition and affirmation statements that acknowledge the infinite intelligence already operating within you. When you declare, "Christ in me is wisdom," or "Christ in me is wealth," you're not attempting to convince yourself of something untrue or engaging in positive thinking exercises. You're actually igniting what the early practitioners called the messianic spark, that aspect of divine consciousness that exists within every human being. Each time you make these declarations, you're essentially opening what they described as the celestial vault, accessing unlimited resources of intelligence, creativity, and provision that are always available within your own awareness but remain dormant until consciously activated through recognition and acknowledgement. The hidden truth behind this practice is that there's actually nothing more humble than recognizing and stating what's authentically true about your spiritual nature. When you understand this principle, you realize that declaring, "I am poor," or "I lack resources," when you're connected to infinite creative intelligence, isn't humility at all. It's actually a form of ignorant pride that denies your true relationship with unlimited potential. This represents a complete reversal of how most people approach spirituality and personal development. Instead of seeing yourself as a limited being, hoping to receive help from external sources, you learn to recognize yourself as what they called the king's child. Someone who has inherited access to unlimited creative capacity and infinite provision through consciousness alone. The journey toward mastering this recognition requires understanding that spiritual supply operates according to principles that extend far beyond personal benefit or individual accumulation. The Christ consciousness within you doesn't just want to provide for your needs. It wants to transform you into a source of provision for others. The ultimate purpose isn't feeding ego or acquiring material possessions, but allowing your soul to fulfill its authentic mission with complete fullness and effectiveness. Behind The scenes of authentic spiritual development lies this profound transformation from being primarily a receiver to becoming a resource for the world. When you consistently operate from recognition of infinite supply within, you naturally begin overflowing with wisdom, creativity, compassion, and practical solutions that benefit everyone around you. This shift in mindset from scarcity consciousness to abundance consciousness creates ripple effects that extend far beyond your personal experience. As you learn to function as what they called bread for others, you discover that your own supply increases automatically because you're operating in harmony with the fundamental law of circulation rather than accumulation. The impact of this transformation is revolutionary. Instead of constantly focused on what you need or lack, you become genuinely interested in how you can serve, contribute, and add value to other people's lives. This shift from self-centered seeking to service-oriented giving actually activates the most powerful laws of manifestation because you're working with the natural flow of abundance rather than against it. What makes this approach so effective is that it aligns your personal development with your soul's authentic purpose. Instead of trying to manipulate spiritual principles for purely selfish gains, you learn to use them as tools for expressing your highest potential and making your unique contribution to the world's healing and evolution. The decisions you make about whether to use spiritual supply for ego gratification or soul expression determine whether you experience temporary satisfaction or lasting fulfillment. When you recognize that abundance flows most freely through those who serve as conscious channels for its distribution, you discover the secret to both personal prosperity and meaningful contribution. This understanding completely revolutionizes your relationship with money, resources, and material success. Instead of seeing them as ends in themselves, you recognize them as tools that enable you to fulfill your mission more effectively and serve others more powerfully. Now, I want to explore the specific practices they developed for maintaining this service orientation while still ensuring your own needs are abundantly met, because understanding this balance is crucial for sustainable spiritual prosperity that benefits both yourself and others. Write in the comments, becoming bread for others. If you're sensing this call to transform from receiver to resource in your own spiritual journey, the most revolutionary concept in consciousness transformation is what the apostles called metanoia, a Greek term that describes a complete mental mutation, a radical rewiring of your fundamental thought patterns that goes far beyond simple positive thinking or religious conversion. This represents the hidden truth behind every authentic transformation. There's absolutely no exterior change that didn't begin as an interior turn of consciousness. Every instance of abundance, every manifestation of provision, every financial breakthrough has one primary cause, a fundamental shift in consciousness that precedes and creates the external transformation. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach prosperity, success, and material well-being, because it places the power for change exactly where it belongs, within your own awareness rather than in external circumstances. The journey toward understanding metanoia reveals why so many sincere spiritual seekers continue struggling financially, despite genuine faith, regular prayer, and authentic spiritual practice. The hidden truth is that their financial challenges don't stem from lack of faith, but from lack of metanoia. They haven't undergone the complete mental transformation necessary to align their consciousness with abundance principles. Behind the scenes of their spiritual practice lies a fundamental contradiction that sabotages their manifestation efforts. While they pray for abundance and declare faith in divine provision, they continue thinking in purely human terms about money, work, and security. They unconsciously program their minds with scarcity ideas, effort-based thinking, and fear-driven decisions that completely counteract their spiritual intentions. This creates a devastating pattern where sincere people spend years praying for financial breakthrough while simultaneously reinforcing the very mental patterns that prevent it from occurring. They approach abundance from human logic rather than spiritual understanding, trying to figure out how God will provide instead of aligning their consciousness with the infinite supply that's always available. The transformation from human thinking to spiritual thinking requires recognizing that most of what you've been taught about money, success, and provision is actually programming that keeps you trapped in limitation. Human thinking operates from scarcity, competition, and effort. It believes resources are limited, opportunities are rare, and success requires struggle and sacrifice. Spiritual thinking operates from entirely different principles. It recognizes that infinite intelligence contains unlimited creative solutions, that abundance is the natural state of aligned consciousness, and that true prosperity flows through inspiration and service rather than force and manipulation. This shift in mindset creates profound changes in both internal experience and external circumstances. The impact of undergoing genuine metanoia extends far beyond financial improvement. When your fundamental thought patterns transform from scarcity-based to abundance-based, from fear-driven to love-guided, from effort-oriented to inspiration-led, every area of your life begins reorganizing around these elevated principles. What makes this transformation so challenging for many people is that it requires releasing deeply ingrained beliefs about how life works. The human mind has been conditioned to believe that external circumstances determine internal experience, that you must work harder to earn more, and that security comes from accumulating and protecting resources. Metanoia reverses this entire paradigm. You learn that internal transformation creates external change, that aligned consciousness attracts opportunities effortlessly, and that true security comes from recognizing your connection to infinite supply rather than from accumulating finite resources. The decisions you make about whether to think from human limitation or spiritual possibility determine whether you experience ongoing struggle or increasing flow. This choice is available every moment and affects not only your financial reality, but your relationships, health, creativity, and overall life satisfaction. Now, I want to explore the specific techniques the early Christians developed for facilitating this complete mental transformation, because understanding their systematic approach to metanoia is what makes this ancient wisdom immediately practical for creating breakthrough changes in modern life. Write in the comments, "Metanoia activated," if you're ready to undergo this radical mental transformation from scarcity thinking to abundance consciousness. The most practical entry point into authentic metanoia is what the early consciousness practitioners developed as the 7-day mental diet, a systematic approach to beginning the complete rewiring of your thought patterns. This isn't a casual positive thinking exercise, but a rigorous discipline that reveals just how unconsciously most people allow destructive mental patterns to dominate their consciousness throughout each day. The challenge is deceptively simple, yet profoundly transformative. Don't permit any negative thought to remain in your mind for 7 consecutive days. This means absolutely no complaints, no fears, no criticisms, no scarcity ideas, no victimhood thinking, nothing that reinforces limitation or lack. When you first attempt this practice, you'll quickly discover how automatically your mind generates destructive thoughts without your conscious awareness or permission. The hidden truth behind this discipline is that it forces you to become conscious of your unconscious mental habits. Most people spend their entire lives completely unaware of the constant stream of limiting thoughts that flow through their consciousness, creating the very experiences they consciously say they don't want. The 7-day mental diet makes this unconscious programming visible so you can begin changing it deliberately. The journey toward mastering this practice requires understanding that when negative thoughts appear, and they will appear, Your response determines whether you continue the diet or restart from day one. The technique is precise. Observe the thought without judgment. Consciously cancel it by withdrawing your attention and energy from it, then immediately replace it with a positive affirmation that contradicts the limiting pattern. Behind the scenes of this apparently simple practice lies a sophisticated understanding of how consciousness programming actually functions. Every thought you entertain with attention and emotion strengthens neural pathways that make similar thoughts more likely to occur automatically. By consistently cancelling negative patterns and reinforcing positive ones, you're literally rewiring your brain's default settings. The transformation this creates extends far beyond the 7-day period itself. What you're actually developing is the mental discipline necessary for maintaining elevated consciousness throughout daily life. You're learning to function as the conscious director of your own mental activity rather than as a passive victim of whatever thoughts happen to arise. This foundation of mental discipline becomes the platform for implementing 3 daily practices that accelerate the metanoia process exponentially. The first practice establishes your consciousness at the beginning of each day by pronouncing aloud a specific abundance affirmation immediately upon waking, before your mind becomes cluttered with the day's concerns and distractions. The second practice maintains conscious vigilance throughout your daily activities by training yourself to observe your reactions and mental responses. When you catch yourself thinking from fear, lack, or limitation, you stop immediately, take a conscious breath, and declare, "I cancel this image. Christ in me provides." This interrupts the destructive pattern and redirects your attention toward your infinite source. The third practice seals each day with gratitude, reviewing your experiences and finding specific reasons to appreciate what occurred, regardless of whether circumstances matched your preferences. This practice programs your subconscious with abundance consciousness during the highly receptive period just before sleep. The impact of implementing these 3 practices consistently creates cumulative effects that compound over time. Your morning affirmation sets an elevated tone for the entire day. Your midday corrections prevent limiting thoughts from taking root and creating negative momentum. Your evening gratitude ensures you fall asleep in abundance consciousness rather than worry or dissatisfaction. The decisions you make about whether to maintain this disciplined approach or return to unconscious mental habits determine whether you experience genuine metanoia or remain trapped in old patterns despite your spiritual intentions. This systematic approach transforms consciousness programming from an abstract concept into a practical daily technology. Now I want to explore the advanced integration strategies they developed for maintaining this elevated consciousness during challenging circumstances, because understanding how to sustain these transformations under pressure is what makes this ancient technology truly reliable for modern life. Write in the comments, 7 days committed, if you're ready to begin this systematic approach to rewiring your consciousness for abundance and success. The most profound revelation in consciousness technology is understanding that absolutely nothing in creation moves, changes, or manifests without a word being spoken, either audibly or silently, in consciousness. This isn't poetic metaphor, but a fundamental law governing how reality operates at the deepest levels. When you pronounce words with genuine principle knowledge, authentic spiritual authority, and clear divine identity consciousness, what emerges from your mouth isn't merely sound vibrations, but concentrated power, creative force, opening doors, active causation, and master keys to transformation. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach communication, prayer, and conscious manifestation. Most people use words casually, unconsciously, reactively, never realizing they're constantly creating their reality through the vibrational patterns they're generating with their speech. But when you grasp that every word spoken with proper consciousness functions as a decree that the universe works to fulfill, your entire relationship with language transforms dramatically. The journey toward mastering this spoken word technology is perfectly demonstrated in one of the most remarkable healing accounts in early Christian history. When Peter encountered the lame man at the temple gate and declared, "I don't have silver or gold, but what I have I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise and walk," he wasn't making a hopeful suggestion or expressing religious sentiment. He was speaking with absolute certainty in the name of what they called the active principle, the creative force that responds to conscious command. Behind the scenes of this extraordinary healing lies a crucial understanding that most people completely miss. Peter's spoken word didn't just inspire the man or encourage positive thinking, it literally reorganized the energy patterns in the sick body, restoring proper function through the power of conscious decree. This demonstrates that words spoken from elevated consciousness can create immediate, tangible changes in physical reality. The hidden truth about this healing formula is that Peter wasn't operating from personal power or individual ability. He was functioning as a conscious channel for divine creative force, speaking from what they called spiritual authority rather than human hope. When you understand this principle, you realize that any person can learn to speak with similar effectiveness by aligning their consciousness with the same creative intelligence. What makes this approach so powerful is that it works with the fundamental structure of how consciousness and matter interact. Modern quantum physics is beginning to confirm what these ancient practitioners knew through direct experience. The consciousness plays a primary role in determining how energy organizes itself into form and experience. The transformation that occurs when you begin speaking from this elevated consciousness extends far beyond occasional dramatic healings. Every word you speak with conscious intention begins influencing your environment, relationships, and circumstances in subtle but cumulative ways. Your speech becomes a constant tool for consciousness programming rather than unconscious commentary on existing conditions. The impact of mastering conscious decree creates ripple effects that extend throughout your entire life experience. Instead of using words to describe problems, limitations, and disappointments, you learn to use them as creative instruments for generating solutions, possibilities, and improvements. Your conversations become opportunities for conscious creation rather than unconscious perpetuation of unwanted patterns. The mindset shift this represents is profound. You stop seeing yourself as someone who talks about life and start functioning as someone who speaks life into being. You recognize that your voice carries creative authority when properly aligned with spiritual principle, and you begin taking responsibility for the reality you're creating through your daily declarations and conversations. The decisions you make about whether to speak from conscious authority or unconscious reaction determine whether your words function as keys that open doors or chains that reinforce limitations. This choice is available in every conversation, every prayer, every internal dialogue you have throughout each day. Now, I want to explore the specific techniques they developed for developing this spiritual authority in speech, because understanding their systematic approach to conscious decree is what transforms casual communication into precision tools for reality transformation. Write in the comments, "Words are power," if you're beginning to recognize the creative force contained within your own spoken declarations. One of the most sophisticated consciousness technologies developed by the early practitioners was what they called rhythmic decree, a systematic approach to spoken affirmation that amplifies the creative power of words through precise timing, repetition, and energetic focus. This ancient method represents far more than simple positive thinking or casual affirmation. Practice. It's a precise technique for programming consciousness and organizing reality through the strategic use of rhythm, repetition, and vibrational alignment. The methodology involves selecting brief, precise, meaningful affirmations and repeating them in sustained rhythm for predetermined periods. What makes this approach so extraordinarily effective is that rhythm creates an energetic field around your consciousness. Repetition breaks through mental inertia and resistance, and the focused words begin organizing what they called substance, the fundamental creative material from which all experience emerges. The hidden truth behind rhythmic decree is that it works with the natural oscillations of consciousness itself. Your brain operates through rhythmic electrical patterns. Your heart beats in rhythm, your breathing follows rhythm, and when you align your spoken words with these natural rhythms, you create a state of coherence that dramatically amplifies your creative power. Behind the scenes of this practice lies an understanding that most modern approaches to affirmation completely miss. Random positive statements spoken occasionally have minimal impact because they lack the sustained focus and rhythmic power necessary to penetrate deeply into subconscious programming. But when you speak the same empowering words repeatedly in rhythm, you create what they called a vibrational groove that becomes increasingly automatic and influential. The journey toward mastering rhythmic decree requires understanding that this isn't meditation or passive mental exercise, but active consciousness engineering. You're literally using your voice, breath, and focused attention to reshape the energy patterns that determine your experience of reality. This represents one of the most direct ways to participate consciously in your own creation. The transformation this practice creates extends beyond the decree sessions themselves into a complementary technology they developed and called synoptic visualization, the recognition that imagination isn't a decorative mental faculty for entertainment or escapism, but the primary creative tool through which reality itself is formed and shaped. This understanding completely revolutionizes how you approach mental imagery, daydreaming, and visualization practices. What most people dismiss as fantasy or wishful thinking is actually the matrix, the fundamental creative space where the world later called reality is initially formed, before manifesting in physical experience. The impact of recognizing imagination as creative instrument rather than meaningless mental activity is profound. Every image you hold in consciousness with sustained attention and emotional involvement becomes a blueprint that your awareness works to materialize through corresponding thoughts, decisions, and actions. This isn't mystical speculation, but practical understanding of how consciousness functions as a creative force. When synoptic visualization is worked consciously in union with spiritual principle, it becomes what they called a sacred instrument for conscious creation. Instead of allowing random images to drift through your mind unconsciously, you learn to choose specific visions that align with your highest possibilities and hold them with the same focused attention you would give to anything you seriously intended to create. The decisions you make about which images to cultivate and which to dismiss determine whether your imagination serves your highest good or reinforces limitations and fears. This choice represents one of the most powerful tools available for consciousness transformation because it works directly with the creative faculty that shapes all experience. The mindset shift from unconscious imagery to conscious visualization creates cumulative effects that compound over time. As you become more deliberate about the mental pictures you're creating and sustaining, your external circumstances begin reflecting these elevated internal visions with increasing accuracy and speed. Now, I want to explore the specific integration techniques they developed for combining rhythmic decree with synoptic visualization, because understanding how to unite these two powerful practices creates a complete system for consciousness mastery and reality transformation. Write in the comments, "Sacred instrument activated," if you're ready to begin using your imagination as a conscious tool for creating your desired reality. The most revolutionary discovery of the early Christian movement wasn't architectural, organizational, or institutional. It was the recognition that authentic spiritual power emerges when certain souls develop the capacity to unite in consciousness and form what they called a common field of faith. From the very beginning, the true force of Christianity didn't reside in temples, hierarchies, or religious structures, but in this invisible yet tangible shared vibration created when minds align around elevated principles and common purpose. This understanding completely transforms how we think about spiritual community and collective transformation. The Church, in its most authentic form, began as a magnetic circle of consciousness, a group of individuals who had learned to harmonize their mental and emotional energies around shared recognition of divine presence and possibility. This created an energetic field that was far more powerful than the sum of its individual parts. The hidden truth behind this phenomenon is that when multiple consciousness unite around elevated principles, they don't just add their individual power together, they multiply it exponentially. This represents one of the most sophisticated applications of consciousness technology ever developed, creating what modern science is beginning to recognize as coherent group consciousness that can influence reality in ways that seem impossible from purely individual effort. Behind the scenes of their remarkable manifestations and transformations lay this systematic understanding of how to create and maintain magnetic circles of faith. These weren't casual social gatherings or emotional religious meetings, but precisely structured consciousness laboratories, where each participant learned to contribute their focused attention and elevated energy toward common objectives and shared vision. The journey toward creating authentic spiritual community requires understanding that this magnetic field effect only occurs when participants maintain what they called interior unity, not just agreement about beliefs or doctrines, but actual alignment of consciousness around spiritual principles that transcend individual personalities and preferences. This creates a collective awareness that becomes a powerful force for manifestation and transformation. The impact of participating in genuine magnetic circles extends far beyond group meetings or spiritual gatherings. When you learn to contribute your consciousness deliberately to collective elevation, you develop capacities that transform every aspect of your individual practice and personal effectiveness. You become more focused, more purposeful, and more aligned with creative intelligence. This collective consciousness technology naturally leads to understanding what the early practitioners called mental offering, the recognition that spiritual development isn't measured by what you receive, but by what you consciously give. This represents a fundamental shift from consumer consciousness to contributor consciousness that revolutionizes your entire approach to spiritual practice and personal growth. The transformation occurs when you truly grasp that everything you give through conscious intention returns multiplied, while everything you withhold through fear or scarcity thinking is eventually lost. This isn't moral teaching, but practical law governing how consciousness and energy actually operate in the universe. The kingdom economy, unlike human economics, is based on circulation rather than accumulation. Mental offering means understanding that conscious giving is literally sowing, planting seeds in the invisible field of consciousness that will eventually produce corresponding harvests in your visible experience. When you give thoughts of blessing, visualization of others' success, mental support for collective projects, or focused attention on elevated outcomes, you're engaging in the most powerful form of spiritual practice available. The mindset shift from receiving orientation to giving orientation creates profound changes in both individual consciousness and collective field dynamics. Instead of constantly focused on what you need or want, You become genuinely interested in what you can contribute, how you can serve, and what value you can add to the collective consciousness of your community and the world. The decisions you make about whether to approach spiritual practice as consumer or contributor determine whether you experience gradual individual improvement or participate in exponential collective transformation that benefits everyone involved while simultaneously accelerating your own evolution. What we've explored together today represents just the beginning of understanding how these ancient consciousness technologies can transform your modern life. The Syrian Christians, the Antioch community, the early practitioners, they left us a complete blueprint for operating from elevated awareness. But like any powerful technology, it requires consistent practice and conscious application to produce the remarkable results they achieved. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, you've already demonstrated something significant. The willingness to go deeper than surface-level spirituality and engage with practices that require genuine commitment and understanding. That willingness is exactly what creates the difference between those who experience breakthrough transformations and those who remain stuck in familiar patterns. The value of this content lies not just in the information itself, but in your willingness to apply these principles systematically in your daily life. If you've found this exploration valuable and you're ready to continue developing these consciousness technologies, I genuinely appreciate you subscribing to the channel. This allows me to continue sharing these deeper insights and practical applications that can genuinely transform how you experience reality. If this message resonated with something deep within you, if you sense that these ancient keys were meant to find their way to you at exactly this moment in your journey, write in the comments, "This message was meant for me." It helps me understand that this content is reaching the souls who are truly ready for this level of consciousness work. And if you felt that connection we've been building throughout this exploration, if something within you recognized the truth in these ancient practices, a simple like on the video helps this content reach others who are searching for the same authentic spiritual technology you've been seeking. There's a video right here that complements this topic perfectly, diving even deeper into the practical applications of these consciousness principles. Click and continue with me over there, because the journey we've started together is just beginning to unfold its true potential.